this video we're talking about elements, compounds, and mixtures. Okay, remember these are substances. Some of them can be pure, some can be impure. Okay, so when we look at elements are pure substances that cannot be split into simpler or two or more substances. Okay, so these elements, when we talk about elements, these elements, remember your elements, elements can be in the states. You can classify these elements in various states, like their state of matter, which is solid, liquid, and gas. We'll talk about metals, or talk about elements that are in solid states, like your sodium, and look at the elements in the liquid state, like your mercury, and then look at some elements in the gaseous states, like your gases, your oxygen gas, and the rest. So we can classify these elements as this. Then we can also classify these elements as metals. Of course, you know your metals, your group 1 elements, your group 2 elements, and group 3 elements. Your transition metals, these are all metals. Okay, they are still elements, right? And then we look at the non-metals, like your group 7, the halogens, the chlorine, the fluorine, the bromine, and the rest of them. Okay, so look at also the metalloids. The metalloids are those ones that the group 4 elements, those elements that have properties of metals and non-metals. Example, like silicon and germanium. Remember? Okay, so also these elements can be grouped as atoms. Okay, so when you have only one atom of them, when they have just one atom, they can be grouped as atoms or molecules. For example, when you look at this is sodium atom. This, how many atoms? Are just one atom is here, right? So they can also be grouped as molecules. For example, when you look at something like oxygen, like this is a molecule. It contains 2 atoms, right? It's a molecule. So these elements can be in this form, they can be in this form. So when it is in this form, you say that the element is monoatomic. When it's in this form, it is what? Diatomic. When you have something like ozone, this is triatomic. So elements can also behave they can be classified as atoms or molecules. As a molecule, they can be written as a molecule, they can be 2 or more elements combined together. So let's say, for example, water molecule. Okay, so this is also a molecule, but in this form they are not elements, right? They are now compounds. Talk about compounds, right? So now elements can be classified depending on what you are trying to consider. Okay, so as a metal, elements can be classified as metal. So now looking at the first 20 elements, remember we have over 118 elements in the periodic table. Then but looking at the first 20 elements from hydrogen down to calcium, you should be able to differentiate which ones are metals, which ones are non-metals, and which ones are what? Are metalloids. By the time we look at the periodic table properly, you should be able to understand this phenomenon we are talking about. Now, talking about compounds. We say compounds, these are pure substances that contains 2 or more elements. So they contain 2 or more elements that are chemically combined, and this combination is in form of what we call a ratio. They have a ratio. Okay, for example, if you look at this thing now, look at this model, look at this CaCO3. Why did you say that this is a compound? This is a compound because these things are chemically, these elements that come together are chemically combined. You can't separate them with a physical means. You can't separate them by any physical technique. Okay, so the ratio is 1:1:3. So look at this now. They are chemically combined, and this particular ratio gives you an exact compound, which is called calcium triisocarbonate 4, or limestone, right? It's your limestone. So the same thing goes with other compounds. Also, if you look at these compounds, a compound may be made up of what? Molecules. They are made up of molecules that are covalently bonded, which is chemically bonded, or ions that are what? Ionically bonded or electrovalent bonding. Okay, now example is this CO2. CO2 is covalently bonded, while sodium chloride is what? Is ionically bonded. When I mean ionically bonded, it means that the bond holding these 2 compounds is an ionic bond. So these bonds are not physical bonds, they are chemical bonds that cannot be broken by physical means. You only need chemical reactions to be able to break these bonds. So compounds are chemically bonded, they are not physically bonded. They are chemically bonded and they cannot be splitted by a chemical process. So there are several examples of compounds you can never think of. So there are so many of them. So in the course of this lecture, you should be able to know the difference between a compound and an element. The last one here is mixtures. Of course, we have talked about mixtures before. So that mixtures is a combination of 2 or more elements or substances that are not chemically combined. They can contain elements, they can contain gases, they can contain compounds, but they are not chemically combined. Example is a mixture of two gases. Let's say we mix helium gas with oxygen gas, or a mixture of a substance, two substances, let's say sand and water, or think of any substance you can mix that are not chemically bonded. Water and oil, you can separate these things, right? They are not chemically bonded. You can separate them with a physical means like filtration method, or distillation, or crystallization. You can use any of those separation techniques to separate these things. So those substances that are not chemically bonded, that can be separated by separation techniques, they are mixtures. Your urine, these are all mixtures. Just think about, there are several mixtures you can never think of, okay? Something that you can separate with a physical means, they are mixtures, okay? So the difference between a mixture and a compound is that mixtures are not chemically bonded and they can be separated by physical means, okay? But compounds are chemically bonded and cannot be separated by a physical means. Instead, you can only separate them using chemical reaction if needs be, okay? So these are the key. Looking at these three elements, compound and mixture, I believe you should be able to understand the difference between these three things and should be able to give an example or know which one is which when you are being called upon to look at them.